Robert E. Howard, The Valley of the Worm. I will tell you of Njord and the Worm. You have heard the tale before in many guises, wherein the hero was named Tyr, or Perseus, or Siegfried, or Beowulf, or Saint George. But it was Njord who met the loathly, demoniac thing that crawled hideously up from hell, and from which meaning sprang the cycle of hero tales that revolves down the ages until the very substance of the truth is lost and passes into the limbo of all forgotten legends. I know whereof I speak, for I was Njord. As I lie here, awaiting death, which creeps slowly upon me like a blind slug, my dreams are filled with glittering visions and the pageantry of glory. It is not of the drab, disease-racked life of James Allison I dream, but all the gleaming figures of the mighty pageantry that have passed before and shall come after. For I have faintly glimpsed not merely the shapes that trail out behind, but shapes that come after, as a man in a long parade glimpses far ahead the line of figures that precede him, winding over a distant hill, etched shadow-like against the sky. I am one and all the pageantry of shapes and guises and masks which have been, are, and shall be the visible manifestation of that elusive, intangible, but vitally existent spirit, now promenading under the brief and temporary name of James Allison. Each man on earth, each woman, is part and all of a similar caravan of shapes and beings. But they cannot remember, their minds cannot bridge the brief, awful gulfs of blackness which lie between those unstable shapes, and which the spirit, soul, or ego, in spanning, shakes off its fleshy masks. I remember. Why I can remember is the strangest tale of all. But as I lie here, with death's black wings slowly unfolding over me, all the dim folds of my previous lives are shaken out before my eyes, and I see myself in many forms and guises. Braggart, swaggering, fearful, loving, foolish, all that men have been or will be. I have been man in many lands and many conditions. Yet, and here is another strange thing, my line of reincarnation runs straight down one unerring channel. I have never been any but a man of that restless race man once called Nordheimer, and later Aryans, and today named by many names and designations. Their history is my history. From the first mewing wail of a hairless white ape cub in the wastes of the Arctic, to the death cry of the last degenerate product of ultimate civilization in some dim and unguessed future age. My name has been Hjalmar, Tyr, Bragi, Bron, Horza, Eric, and John. I strode red-handed through the deserted streets of Rome behind the yellow-maned Brennus. I wandered through the violated plantations with Alaric and his Goths when the flame of burning villas lit the land like day and an empire was gasping its last under our sandaled feet. I waded sword in hand through the foaming surf from Hengist's galley to lay the foundation of England in blood and pillage. When Leave the Lucky sighted the broad white beaches of an unguessed world, I stood beside him in the bows of the dragon ship, my golden beard blowing in the wind. And when Godfrey of Bouillon led his crusaders over the walls of Jerusalem, I was among them, in steel cap and brigandine. But it is of none of those things I would speak. I would take you back with me into an age besides which that of Brennus and Rome is as yesterday. I would take you back through not merely centuries and millenniums, but epochs and dim ages unguessed by the wildest philosopher. Oh, far, far and far will you fare into the nighted past before you win beyond the boundaries of my race. Blue-eyed, yellow-haired wanderers, slayers, lovers, mighty in rapine and wayfaring. It is the adventure of Njord Wormsbane of which I speak, the root stem of a whole cycle of hero tales which has not yet reached its end, the grisly underlying reality that lurks behind time-distorted myths of dragons, fiends, and monsters. Yet it is not alone with the mouth of Njord that I will speak. I am James Allison, no less than I was Njord, and as I unfold the tale, I will interpret some of his thoughts and dreams and deeds from the mouth of the modern eye, so that the saga of Njord shall not be a meaningless chaos to you. His blood is your blood, who are sons of Aryan. But wide, misty gulfs of eons lie horrifically between, and the deeds and dreams of Njord seem as alien to your deeds and dreams as the primordial and lion-hunted forest seems alien to the white-walled city street. It was a strange world in which Njord lived and loved and fought so long ago that even my eon-spanning memory cannot recognize landmarks. Since then, the surface of the earth has changed, not once, but a score of times. Continents have risen and sunk. Seas have changed their beds and rivered their courses. Glaciers have waxed and waned, and the very stars and constellations have altered and shifted. It was so long ago that the cradle land of my race was still in Nordheim, But the epic drifts of my people had already begun, and the blue-eyed, yellow-maned tribes flowed eastward and southward and westward, on century-long treks that carried them around the world and left their bones and their traces in strange lands and wild waste places. On one of those drifts, I grew from infancy to manhood. My knowledge of that northern homeland was dim memories, like half-remembered dreams of blinding white snow plains and ice fields, of great fires roaring in the circle of hide tents, of yellow manes flying in great winds, and a sun setting in a lurid valley of crimson clouds, blazing on trampled snow, where still dark forms lay in pools that were redder than the sunset. That last memory stands out clearer than the others. It was the field of Jotunheim, I was told in later years, whereon had just been fought that terrible battle, which was the Armageddon of the Aesir folk, the subject of a cycle of hero songs for long ages, and which still lives today in dim dreams of Ragnarok and Götterdämmerung. I looked on that battle as a mewling infant, so I must have lived about. But I will not name the age, for I would be called a madman, and historians and geologists alike would rise to refute me. But my memories of Nordheim were few and dim, paled by memories of that long trek upon which I had spent my life. We had not kept to a straight course, but our trend had been forever southward. Sometimes we had bided for a while in fertile upland valleys or rich river-traversed plains. But always we took up the trail again, and not always because of drought or famine. Often we left countries teeming with game and wild grain to push into wastelands. On our trail we moved endlessly, driven only by our restless whim, yet blindly following a cosmic law, the workings of which we never guessed, any more than the wild geese guess in their flights around the world. So at last we came into the country of the worm. I will take up the tale at a time when we came into jungle-clad hills, reeking with rot and teeming with spawning life, where the tom-toms of a savage people pulsed incessantly through the hot, breathless night. These people came forth to dispute our way. Short, strongly built men, black-haired, painted, ferocious, but indisputably white men. We knew their breed of old. They were Picts, and of all alien races, the fiercest. We had met their kind before in thick forests and in upland valleys beside mountain lakes, but many moons had passed since those meetings. I believe this particular tribe represented the easternmost drift of the race. They were the most primitive and ferocious of any I ever met. Already they were exhibiting hints of characteristics I have noted amongst black savages in jungle countries. Though they had dwelled in these environs only a few generations, the abysmal jungle was engulfing them, was obliterating their pristine characteristics, and shaping them in its own horrific mold. They were drifting into headhunting, and cannibalism was but a step which I believe they must have taken before they became extinct. These things are natural adjuncts to the jungle. The Picts did not learn them from the black people, for then there were no blacks among those hills. In later years they came up from the south, and the Picts first enslaved and then were absorbed by them. But with that my saga of Njord is not concerned. We came into that brutish hill country with its squalling abysms of savagery and black primitiveness. We were a whole tribe marching on foot, old men, wolfish with their long beards and gaunt limbs, giant warriors in their prime, naked children running along the line of march, women with tousled yellow locks carrying babies which never cried, unless it were to scream from pure rage. I do not remember our numbers, except that there were some 500 fighting men, and by fighting men I mean all males, from the child just strong enough to lift a bow, to the oldest of the old men. In that madly ferocious age, all were fighters. Or women fought when brought to bay like tigresses. And I have seen a baby, not yet old enough to stammer articulate words, twist its head and sink its tiny teeth into the foot that stamped out its life. Oh, we were fighters. Let me speak of Njord. I am proud of him, the more when I consider the paltry, crippled body of James Allison, the unstable mask I now wear. Njord was tall, with great shoulders, lean hips, and mighty limbs. His muscles were long and swelling, denoting endurance and speed as well as strength. He could run all day without tiring, and he possessed a coordination that made his movement a blur of blinding speed. If I told you his full strength, you would brand me a liar. But there is no man on earth today strong enough to bend the bow Njord handled with ease. The longest arrow flight on record is that of a Turkish archer who sent a shaft 482 yards. There was not a stripling in my tribe who could not have bettered that flight. As we entered the jungle country, we heard the tom-toms booming across the mysterious valleys that slumbered between the brutish hills, and in the broad, open plateau, we met our enemies. I do not believe these Picts knew us, even by legends, or they had never rushed so openly to the onset. Though they outnumbered us, but there was no attempt at ambush. They swarmed out of the trees, dancing and singing their war songs, yelling their barbarous threats. Our heads should hang in their idolhood, and our yellow-haired women should bear their sons. Ho, ho, ho. By Ymir, it was Njord who laughed at them, not James Allison. Just so we of the Aesir laughed to hear their threats. Deep, thunderous laughter from broad and mighty chests. Our trail was laid in blood and embers through many lands, and we were the slayers and ravishers, striding sword in hand across the world, and that these folk threatened us woke our rugged humor. We went to meet them, naked but for our wolf hides, swinging our bronze swords, and our singing was like a rolling thunder in the hills. They sent their arrows among us, and we gave back their fire. They could not match us in archery. Our arrows hissed in blinding clouds among them, dropping them like autumn leaves, until they howled and frothed like mad dogs and charged to hand grips. And we, mad with a fighting joy, dropped our bows and ran to meet them, as a lover runs to his love. By Ymir, it was a battle to madden and make drunken with the slaughter and the fury. The Picts were as ferocious as we, but ours was the superior physique, the keener wit, the more highly developed fighting brain. We won because we were a superior race. But it was no easy victory. Corpses littered the blood-soaked earth, but at last they broke, and we cut them down as they ran to the very edge of the trees. I tell of that fight in a few bold words. I cannot paint the madness, the reek of sweat and blood, the panting, muscle-straining effort, the splintering of bones under mighty blows, the rending and hewing of quivering sentient flesh, above all the merciless abysmal savagery of the whole affair, in which there was neither rule nor order, each man fighting as he would or could. If I might do so, you would recoil in horror. Even the modern eye, cognizant of my close kinship with those times, stand aghast as I reviewed that butchery. Mercy was yet unborn, as some individuals' whim, and rules of warfare were as yet undreamed of. It was an age in which tribe and each human fought tooth and fang from birth to death, and neither gave nor expected mercy. So we cut down the fleeing Picts, and our women came out on the fields to brain the wounded enemies with stones, or cut their throats with copper knives. We did not torture. We were no more cruel than life demanded. The rule of life was ruthlessness, but there is more wanton cruelty today than ever we dreamed of. It was not wanton bloodthirstiness that made us butcher wounded and captive foes. It was because we knew our chances of survival increased with each enemy slain. Yet, there was occasionally a touch of individual mercy. And so it was in this fight. I had been occupied with a duel with an especially valiant enemy. His tousle thatch of black hair scarcely came above my chin, but he was a solid knot of steel spring muscles than which lightning scarcely moved faster. He had an iron sword and a hide-covered buckler. I had a knotty-headed bludgeon. That fight was one that glutted even my battle-lusting soul. I was bleeding from a score of flesh wounds before one of my terrible, lashing strokes smashed his shield like cardboard, and an instant later, my bludgeon glanced from his unprotected head. Ymir. Even now, I stop to laugh and marvel at the hardness of that Pict's skull. Men of that age were assuredly built on a rugged plan. That blow should have spattered his brains like water. It did lay his scalp open horribly, dashing him senseless to the earth, where I let him lie, supposing him to be dead, as I joined in the slaughter of the fleeing warriors. When I returned, reeking with sweat and blood, my club horridly clotted with blood and brains, I noticed that my antagonist was regaining consciousness, and that a naked, tousle-headed girl was preparing to give him the finishing touch with a stone she could scarcely lift. A vagrant whim caused me to check the blow. I had enjoyed the fight, and I admired the adamantine quality of his skull. We made camp a short distance away, burned our dead on a great pyre, and after looting the corpses of the enemy, we dragged them across the plateau and cast them down in a valley to make a feast for the hyenas, jackals, and vultures, which were already gathering. We kept close watch that night, but we were not attacked, though far away through the jungle we could make out the red gleam of fires and could faintly hear, when the wind veered, the throb of tom-toms and demoniac screams and yells, keening for the slain or mere animal squallings of fury. Nor did they attack us in the days that followed. We bandaged our captive's wounds and quickly learned his primitive tongue, which, however, was so different from ours that I cannot conceive of the two languages having ever had a common source. His name was Grom, and he was a great hunter and fighter, he boasted. He talked freely and held no grudge, grinning broadly and showing tusk-like teeth, his beady eyes glaring from under the tangled black mane that fell over his low forehead. His limbs were almost ape-like in their thickness. He was vastly interested in his captures, though he could never understand why he had been spared. To the end, it remained an inexplicable mystery to him. The Picts obeyed the law of survival even more rigidly than did the Aesir. They were the more practical, as shown by their more settled habits. They never roamed as far or as blindly as we. Yet, in every line, we were the superior race. Grom, impressed by our intelligence and fighting qualities, volunteered to go into the hills and make peace for us with his people. It was immaterial to us, but we let him go. Slavery had not yet been dreamed of. So, Grom went back to his people, and we forgot about him. Except that I went a trifle more cautiously about my hunting, expecting him to be lying in wait to put an arrow through my back. Then, one day, we heard a rattle of tom-toms, and Grom appeared at the edge of the jungle. His face split in his gorilla grin, with the painted, skin-clad, feather-bedecked chiefs of the clans. Our ferocity had awed them, and our sparing of Grom further impressed them. They could not understand leniency. Evidently, we valued them too cheaply to bother about killing one when he was in our power. So peace was made with much powwow and sworn with many strange oaths and rituals. We swore only by Ymir, and an Aesir never broke that vow. But they swore by the elements, by the idol which sat in the fetish hut where fires burned forever, and a withered crone slapped a leather-covered drums all night long, and by another being too terrible to be named. Then we all sat around the fires and gnawed meat bones and drank a fiery concoction they brewed from wild grain. And the wonder is that the feast did not end in a general massacre, for that liquor had devils in it and made maggots writhe in our brains. But no harm came of our vast drunkenness, and thereafter we dwelt at peace with our barbarous neighbors. They taught us many things and learned many more from us. But they taught us iron workings, into which they had been forced by the lack of copper in those hills, and we quickly excelled them. We went freely among their villages, mud-walled clusters of huts in hilltop clearings, overshadowed by giant trees, and we allowed them to come at will among our camps, straggling lines of hide tents on the plateau where the battle had been fought. Our young men cared not for their squat, beady-eyed women, and our rangy, clean-limbed girls with their tousled yellow heads were not drawn to the hairy-breasted savages. Familiarities over a period of years would have reduced the repulsion from either side until the two races would have flowed together to form one hybrid people. But long before that time the Aesir rose and departed, vanishing into the mysterious hazes of the haunted south. But before that exodus there came to pass the horror of the worm. I hunted with Grom, and he led me into brooding, uninhabited valleys, and up into silenced haunted hills, where no man had set foot before us. But there was one valley, off in the mesas of the southwest, into which he would not go. Stumps of shattered columns, relics of a forgotten civilization, stood among the trees on the valley floor. Grom showed them to me as we stood on the cliffs that flanked the mysterious vale. But he would not go down into it, and he dissuaded me when I would have gone alone. He would not speak plainly of the danger that lurked there, but it was greater than that of serpent or tiger or the trumpeting elephants which occasionally wandered up in devastating droves from the south. Of all beasts, Grom told me in the gutturals of his tongue, the Picts feared only Satha, the great snake, and they shunned the jungle where he lived. But there was another thing they feared, and it was connected in some manner with the Valley of Broken Stones, as the Picts called the crumbling pillars. Long ago, when his ancestors had first come into the country, they had dared that grim vale, and a whole clan of them had perished. Suddenly, horribly, and unexplainably. At least, Grom did not explain. The horror had come up out of the earth, somehow, and it was not good to talk of it, since it was believed that it might be summoned by speaking of it. Whatever it was. But Grom was ready to hunt with me anywhere else, for he was the greatest hunter among the Picts, and many and fearful were our adventures. Once I killed, with the iron sword I had forged with my own hands, that most terrible of all beasts. old saber-tooth, which man today call a tiger because he was more like a tiger than anything else. In reality, he was almost as much like a bear in build, save for his unmistakably feline head. Sabertooth was massive-limbed, with a low-hung, great heavy body, and he vanished from the earth because he was too terrible a fighter, even for that grim age. As his muscles and ferocity grew, his brain dwindled, until at last even the instinct of self-preservation vanished. Nature, who maintains her balance in such things, destroyed him because had his super fighting powers been allied with an intelligent brain, he would have destroyed all other forms of life on Earth. He was a freak on the road of evolution. Organic development gone mad and run to fangs and talons, to slaughter and destruction. I killed Saber-Tooth in a battle that would make a saga in itself. And for months afterward, I lay semi-delirious with ghastly wounds that made the toughest warriors shake their heads. The Picts said that never before had a man killed a saber-tooth single-handed. Yet I recovered, to the wonder of all. End of part 1. So, that was the first part of that really epic story. I'll upload the second one ASAP. I hope y'all enjoyed it, and if so, please like and subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. Oh yeah, before I forget, I'm also doing a reading of H.P. Lovecraft's The Festival, so if you're interested, stay tuned.